So this is a video of the fairy tale Tibicen, Versicolor, which of course is the Pied Piper, in which I'm going to be translating it, talking about things, and as per usual, there will be 4 to 5 embedded items that simply by watching this video, not only do you benefit by obviously going over it, but you will also earn an easy and free 100. So let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, we notice that there is no diacritical marks. There are no macrons and things like that, so I'll be pointing out necessarily where they might be. So, oleum, in the, of course, style of the illuminated manuscript, back when we had to copy things by hand before Gutenberg, and very often you would incorporate the first page or the first letter of the word that you were writing first with an illustration. So, oleum, once upon a time, there was. Remember, it could be he was, she was, it was, or there was, the imperfect of the verb to be. A small town, Oppidum, in Media Germania, in Middle Germany. Hoc Oppidum, this town, modified by the perfect passive participle, the fourth principal part, appello, appellare, appellavi, appellatus. Having been named, having been called Hamel, it incursum erat. Now, I can see that erat, but I cannot see that erat because it is a part of what we call a periphrastic. When you take the perfect passive participle, fourth principal part, and pair it with the imperfect of the verb to be, it becomes a pluperfect passive verb. That town, this town, had been infested, had been overrun a moribus by mice. Milia, like a millennium, thousands of black, or negrorum is black, thousands of big and black mice, genitive plural, were running through the town. There were, again with errant, tot mures, so many mice that the citizens did not dare, were not daring to walk through the streets. Now, this is what we call an ut result clause. It is a clause following or introduced by a phrase that is going to include a word that will have within it a translation of so, like tot, so many, or tantu, so much, or even just the word tam, which in and of itself means so. It requires, does the result clause, an ut or an ut known, and then an infinitive plus an ending here, which makes the subjunctive verb that is necessary. So they did not dare. Dum se vestiunt. While they clothe themselves, the citizens were finding mice in their clothes. Now, this is a doom clause, and what you will find is that in a doom clause, if it is a present verb, you can, if you would so wish, translate that present verb as happening at the same time. So you could have said, not while they are clothing, but you could have said while they clothed. While they were clothing themselves, the citizens were finding. So if it's a present verb in the doom clause, you can make it be the same tense in English as what we have in the main clause. Doom edunt. While they eat, they were finding mice in their food. So the same thing, you can make it happen at the same time. While they ate, while they were eating, they were finding. And at night it was worse. This is the comparative of the word malum, which means bad. And so therefore, neuter, singular, both of them. It was worse. That's how I know that it's an it, not a he or she. If it were a he or a she, the form would be or with an R. Nevertheless, the mice, the mores, were gnawing, were chewing, all neuter, plural, accusative things, and they were making a terrible sound. Not even is what ne quida means. A deaf person, we're substantizing it, had been able to sleep. I'm translating this as had been able because it is a pluperfect subjunctive. You can tell by the perfect infinitive plus the ending. Your first item that you're going to be putting in is that word surdus that you find on line 9. S-U-R-D-U-S. Spell it correctly, don't make a typo. Nec feles, nec canes, nec venenum, neither cats, nor dogs, nor poison, nor prayers, dative case, to or for, but to all the gods, repelled the mice. So none of that stuff did. Aut quodam die, but on a certain day. Remember, you take qui, quae, quod, and put a dam on it, all of those forms, it becomes certain. And so on a certain day, a peregrinus, a foreigner, peregrinus, is modified by a present active participle, gereins, wearing amazing clothes and a flute, did come to the town. Now, as it looks pervenit, it would be present tense, but because there are no diacritical marks, particularly macrons, I'm going to assume that maybe there is a macron that should be over the E, and when that E is long, it is a perfect stem with a perfect ending, and you can neither see the I nor the T, you can only see the it that is there, as E is the it. If it does not have the long mark, it is a present stem with a present vowel, and you can see the I, which is the vowel, and then the present ending T, but I am going to assume that it is perfect, and so therefore came ad obidum, did come, has come to the town. There was for the tall flute player, and this is what we call your dative of possession, and thus we have listed out all the things that there were for him. A crooked nose, where we get the word depraved, a long beard, and a big green hat, petasus. He did wear, the same verb as what we had with gereins, is the perfect tense gessit, which is a perfect stem and a perfect ending. He did wear black shoes, and it's where we get the word discalciate, which is a word in English that means simply to take your shoes off, and red pants, and a cerulean, which is a light shade of blue, sky blue, because the Latin word for sky is, of course, caium, and then we get the English word cerulean tunic, or a shirt, if you would so wish. Note here that we have too many ands, and so when we have all of those ands, it is a polysyndeton. We're highlighting each of those items individually. Now, up above, we had seen previously, like right here, D-A-M on one of those qui-qui-quod, cuyus. Here, it is a D-E-M, and so therefore, it is not a certain. You also have a situation whereby id has D-E-M added to it, and it would be the same, and we're about to see it in a moment. This is neither. It's Q-U-I-D-E-M, and merely the word that means indeed. Indeed, the Tibicen, which is, of course, the flute player, he seemed. Remember that the verb video videare, when it is passive, is going to not only mean to be seen, but to seem. He seemed miraculous. And the free ones, the children, the ones videntes, laughing, or seeing, I'm sorry, that's laugh. The ones seeing him laughed, or were laughing. The Tibicen, the flute player, announced. Now I could leave that as a clause in and to itself, a main clause, hence why I've underlined it in blue. But here we have a subordinate clause that is the indirect statement. It will have an accusative subject, say is accusative, sui, sibi, say, no nominative, I started in the genitive, so genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, sui, sibi, say, and it will have an infinitive verb that is ironically and oxymoronically a finite verb because it actually has a subject, and it is all introduced by the verb of mental action. The Tibicen, the flute player, announced that, and there's no word that, and so we just add it to let us know that we're starting it into a statement that he, not another guy, but that he himself would repel all the mice. Now this, I can see due to the form, is a future active infinitive, and as a future active infinitive, the action is going to occur after. Since nuntiavit is in the perfect tense, it is going to be in the past, and so my announcing is here, and my repelling then can occur at any point in time, and that's why I use the word would, because it could still be in the past, but yet after, in the present, but yet after, and in the future, but yet after. He announced that he would drive off all the mice if enough of money were given to him himself. Again, genitive, sui, sibi in the dative case, say and say. And what we have here is the protasis. Remember that a protasis is a term for the if clause in a conditional, or y'all would call them if-then statements. And the protasis' verb of an imperfect subjunctive tells to me that this is a present contrary to fact or present imaginary. The citizens feared. The citizens were afraid. Since we have timebat, it is introducing, and that's what the fear word does. It introduces what we call the ut fear clause. Now, The word ut has a negative version, which is nay. And so if ut is positive, nay is negative. Normally we translate uts as that and nays as that not. But because this is a fear clause, for whatever reason, the ut clause has the ut and the nay reversed. And the ut becomes negative and the nay becomes positive. And that's what we have here. The citizens feared that the flute player was a witch. And so we make it a positive. Otherwise you would translate nay as that not. But they wanted most greatly, not just greatly, that'd be magnopede, not more, that'd be magis, but most greatly, they wanted the mice, the mores, to go away. The praetor, that is the term we're using here for the mayor, who was clever, who was skilled, clever is probably the best, says, if the flute player, and your verb that is going to be on the other page is protest. Now, we have again another protasis, we call it the if clause, and the verb is a present indicative, meaning that this is a real condition. So, it's really a possibility. If the flute player is able to drive away the mice. And by the way, your second item is that word calidus in line 20. C-A-L-L-I-D-U-S, meaning clever. So the mayor, who was clever, said, if the flute player is able, and that should be the first word that we see on the other line, there it is, to drive away the mice, which we saw on the other page, then certainly the same guy. Now again, we see here idem of id with a dem, meaning the same. And since this is nominative, the same guy did send, has sent those mice to our town. The Tibicen must be punished. A future passive periphrastic recognized by the letters nd and paired with a form of the verb to be shows obligation. And since that obligation is right now, must be right now punished by us. Normally, your dative is translated to or for, but future passive periphrastic dative of agent. Normally agency, as we saw earlier with incursum erat, is going to be with an ablative like we saw with a moribus. But seeing as it's a dative, or I should say, seeing as a future passive periphrastic dative of agent, and so therefore idiomatically it would say, we must punish the flute player. But literally, the flute player must be punished by us. The mayor continues talking, saying, falam. This is fallere. And thus that long E, because we all know that long E plus an M ends up being an AM, makes it future. I will deceive the flute player, and the mice will go away, and we will pay solvere, not anything. That means and not, but the and and the not are delayed, and we will not pay anything, genitive part of a whole, of money. The words of the mayor, pleased, did please, has pleased, the citizens taking an dative object of that verb requiring dative, most greatly, very greatly, not just greatly. Your third item is that word in line 23, quidquam, meaning anything. Q-U-I-D-Q-U-A-M. Make sure you spell it correctly. Moving on to line 25. Scroll just slightly. There it is. The Tibicen postulated, meaning presented, offered up. So he offered up, tote, quote. Whenever you see a quote or tote, look to see if another word, either the quote or the tote, that is its partner, is there, because it'll be used correlatively. You also see this with quantus and tantus. You also see this with tam and quam, and it'll always be translated as whatever as. Since this is how many and so many, it would be the flute player postulated, offered, as many coins as mice. The citizens again feared. There were thousands of genitive plural mice, and the town was not, and so again, and not, rich. D-ways, D-ways, D-ways. It is a third declension adjective of single termination. However, the mayor said, and that's our main clause, did say, has said. It is a verb of mental action that The accusative town soluturum esse is your, again, future infinitive, meaning that we are starting off at some point in the past. Thus, the future infinitive translates would verb, would pay the flute player, which the verb solvo solvere requires a dative object. The Tibicen announced that he himself, again a future infinitive happening after we are starting off in the past, that he would begin in Kipion Kipide on the 11th hour. Starting off then, line 30, only 8 more to go. On the 11th hour, and so therefore it is a ablative of time, the citizens looked through their windows, so that they could see, so that they would see, so that they might see. This is an purpose clause. And so we've seen 3 clauses so far, an result clause, an fear clause, and here, because this is showing the purpose of them looking out the windows, it's a purpose clause, so that they might see the flute player, and they did see not anything, if not unless, except mice. Suddenly, they did hear a new sound above the screeches, above the shrills, the screechings of the mice. The sound of the flute player, ortum est, a deponent verb. Remember, the deponent verbs, as this is also a deponent verb, are verbs that always look passive but translates actively. And so therefore, even though it looks perfect passive, was verbed, has been verbed, instead we will simply say verbed, did verb, has verb, not has been. And it's from the verb orior, oriri, or to sum, meaning to rise. The song of the flute player arose, did arise. The tibia, the flute, was sounding tui, tui, tell, t. The mice, here described by the present active participle repentes, crawling out of the sewers. And again, a deponent verb, sequor, sequi, secu, sum. The mice were following the flute player. The flute player walked out of the town to the river. All the mice, and again, looks passive, translates actively, not were followed, have been followed, but rather they did the following. They followed, they did follow. All the mice followed, and they rushed ruo ruere into the river. At last, cum, look for an ablative, there is not one with it. Look to see you have a subjunctive, you do. And so, when you do have a subjunctive, you are going to look for the word tamen in the other clause. If the tamen had been there, you will translate the cum as although. But since the tamen is not there, you will translate it when or since, and just go with whichever one sounds the best to you. At last, when or since, all the mice had submerged, had sunken themselves in the river, the town hamel slept. And so, pick one. If it is translated better in your mind as since, then the cum clause is giving the cause of the sleeping. If it is better translated when, it is giving the circumstances, and I think both could actually be argued here. Last point is that I translated mercisset as, of course, pluperfectly, had sunken, from mergo or mergeo, mergere, mercy, mersus. It's where we get the word submerge, submersible, all sorts of things like that. So, your last word is actually that mercisset. M-E-R-S-I-S-S-E-N-T. Mercisset. So good luck and enjoy the easy and free 100.